Beards, Betrayals, and Bloodlines, the rise and fall of the Romanovs. What do you get when you mix a teenage monk, a fake prince launched from a cannon, and a Tsar who taxed beards? You get the Romanovs, Russia's most dramatic, dysfunctional, and dazzling dynasty. This is the story of how one family ruled Russia for over 300 years, and how their stubborn grip on power led to their bloody downfall. But how did a 16-year-old boy hiding in a monastery become Tsar of Russia? Why did Peter the Great disguise himself as a carpenter in Europe? What secret deals, betrayals, and revolts shaped the fate of an empire? As we dive into this interesting battle of legends, be generous, click the subscribe button and turn on your notification bell, because this isn't just history, it's a royal roller coaster of ambition, madness, miracles, and murder. It all started with Ivan the Terrible, Russia's first Tsar, and a man who made terrible look like a lifestyle brand. His son, Fyodor I, inherited the throne but not the temperament. Fyodor was gentle, deeply religious, and tragically childless. When he died in 1598, Russia didn't just lose a Tsar, it lost its last Rurikid heir. To the time of troubles, a period so chaotic it makes Game of Thrones look like a polite tea party. Russia plunged into a political blender. Famine, civil war, foreign invasions, and not one, not two, but three men claiming to be Dmitri, Fyodor's long-dead half-brother. One of them was even launched out of a cannon posthumously, because apparently that's how you send a message in 17th century Russia. Before they were Tsars, the Romanovs were just high-ranking aristocrats with a decent pedigree. Their claim to fame? Anastasia Romanovna, wife of Ivan the Terrible and a beloved Tsarina. Her father, Roman Yurev, gave the family its name, and her descendants, through her brother Nikita, started calling themselves Romanov. It was like branding, but with more fur hats. Fast forward to 1613. Russia was exhausted. The boyars, nobles, merchants, and Cossacks were done with impostors and foreign kings. They convened the Zemsky Sobor, a national assembly, to pick a new Tsar. Their criteria? Someone noble, someone connected to the old dynasty, and preferably someone too young and clueless to cause trouble. Enter Mikhail Romanov, age 16, hiding in a monastery with his mother. His father, Fyodor, had been forcibly tonsured, monk haircut included, and shipped off to Poland, where he was being held like a political Pokemon card. Mikhail had no experience, no ambition, and no idea what was coming. One day, emissaries from Moscow showed up at Mikhail's monastery like, "Surprise, you're the new Tsar." Mikhail reportedly burst into tears. His mother, Ksenia, wasn't thrilled either. But after some persuasion, and probably a few prayers, he accepted. On July 21, 1613, Mikhail Romanov was crowned Tsar of Russia, launching a dynasty that would rule for over 300 years. At first, Mikhail let his maternal relatives run the show. Fortunately, they weren't entirely corrupt. They restored order, made peace with Sweden and Poland, and suppressed rebellions. In year 6 of his reign, Mikhail's father was released from Polish captivity and returned to Russia. He became co-ruler and patriarch of the church, because why not double down on divine legitimacy? Fun fact, it's entirely possible Mikhail was chosen because his father couldn't rule directly due to his monastic vows. So Russia got the son as a workaround. Bureaucracy, but make it medieval. Quick pause. If you're loving this journey through royal drama and historical twists, make sure to subscribe and tap the notification bell. That way, you won't miss the next chapter in this epic saga. Now, back to the intrigue. Mikhail was more figurehead than firebrand. When his father died in 1633, Mikhail again handed power to his mother's relatives. And guess what? It worked. Russia prospered diplomatically, commercially, and culturally. Fyodor, the dad, had used the Zemsky Sobor to reform local government and strengthen serfdom. Great for the nobles, not so much for the peasants. When Mikhail died in 1645, his son Alexis took over. Like his dad, Alexis was 16 and undereducated. He let his brother-in-law run things until a popular uprising in 1648 forced that guy into exile. Alexis then called another Zemsky Sobor, which produced the Sobornoye Uloženie, a legal code that basically locked serfs to their land like medieval Wi-Fi contracts. Alexis faced growing resentment. Peasants hated the loss of freedom. Cities disliked the economic competition from Western trade. Between 1667 and 1671, a massive peasant rebellion erupted. Still, Alexis was considered warm-hearted and popular, just not great at picking competent advisors. When he died in 1676, his son Fyodor III took the throne. Fyodor was better educated but plagued by poor health. Like his predecessors, he was a teenager when crowned, and his uncle initially ran the government. The Romanovs had a knack for delegating and surviving. Fyodor III was no ordinary Romanov. He had a taste for Latin literature, Polish customs, and, brace yourself, Roman Catholic doctrines. That's right, in Orthodox Russia, Fyodor was reading Cicero while sipping his kvass. He replaced his uncle with two courtiers who shared his intellectual vibe, and together they tried to give Russia a Renaissance makeover. But Fyodor wasn't just about books and Polish flair. In 1681, he teamed up with the sharp-minded Vasily Faith Golitsyn, who convinced him to abolish местничество, a medieval system where military leaders were chosen based on family rank rather than actual competence. Imagine firing your general because his great-uncle once insulted your great-aunt at a banquet. Fyodor said, "Enough," and Russia took a step toward meritocracy. Sadly, Fyodor's reign was short-lived. He died at the tender age of 20, leaving behind a legacy of reform and a throne that was about to get very crowded. Fyodor's younger half-brother Ivan Feth was next in line, but he had serious health issues, both mental and physical. Cue Sophia, their ambitious sister, who saw an opportunity and stirred up a riot to install Ivan as joint ruler with her other half-brother Peter, who was just 10 years old and probably still learning how to spell Tsar. Sophia ruled as regent, and let's just say she didn't exactly invite Peter to the royal tea parties. Their maternal families were locked in a feud so bitter it made the Hatfields and McCoys look like brunch buddies. Peter was excluded from court life, which turned out to be a blessing in disguise. While Sophia played palace politics, Peter was out in the real world learning carpentry, blacksmithing, and military strategy. He grew up near foreign colonies and soaked up Western ideas like a sponge in vodka. He was a math nerd, a travel junkie, and a budding naval strategist. In 1695, Peter launched a campaign to capture Azov from the Turks. The first attempt flopped, but Peter wasn't the quitting type. He built a fleet, sailed down the Don River, and took Azov like a boss. Then he did something no Tsar had ever done. He went on a European road trip incognito, calling himself Strength Date. Peter visited schools, museums, and factories, absorbing Western innovations like a sponge in a science fair. He tried to rally Britain and the Dutch into an alliance against Turkey, but they were too busy with the War of the Spanish Succession. So Peter went home and decided to westernize Russia himself. Peter's reforms were bold, brilliant, and occasionally bonkers. He opened secular schools, encouraged Russians to study abroad, modernized the alphabet, and introduced the Julian calendar. He created the table of ranks, allowing commoners to rise through merit rather than noble birth. He also founded the governing Senate, giving Russia a more centralized administration. But Peter's obsession with Western fashion led to one of his most infamous decrees, the beard tax. He ordered all boyars to shave their beards and wear Western clothes. Merchants who wanted to keep their beards had to pay a tax. And if they didn't, Peter's agents would publicly shave them. Imagine walking through Moscow and seeing a nobleman tackled by royal barbers. It was a hairy situation. Peter also turned Russia into a maritime power, founding St. Petersburg on the Baltic Sea. It was cold, swampy, and expensive, but it gave Russia a gateway to Europe and a new imperial capital. Peter died in 1725, having transformed Russia into a European empire. He had decreed that Tsars could name their successors, but forgot to name one. Oops. His second wife, Catherine I, took over but died 2 years later. What followed was a game of musical thrones, 5 rulers in 35 years, each with their own drama. Eventually, Peter and Catherine's daughter Elizabeth seized the throne in 1741. She wasn't exactly a policy wonk, more into fashion and interior design, but her reign was stable, and the arts flourished. She encouraged education and kept Russia out of major wars. Not bad for someone who staged a coup because someone threatened to send her to a convent. Elizabeth died in 1762, leaving the throne to her nephew, Peter III. But that's a whole new chapter involving German intrigue, palace coups, and the rise of Catherine the Great. Peter III took the Russian throne in 1762 and promptly made one of the most unpopular moves in Russian history. He pulled Russia out of the 7 Years' War and cozied up to Prussia, the enemy Russia had just been fighting. It was like showing up to a family reunion wearing the rival football team's jersey. Born in Germany, Peter had all the charisma of a damp sock and the political instincts of a confused tourist. He alienated the army, the nobility, the court, and most importantly, his wife. Enter Catherine, a Prussian princess who married into the Romanov family and quickly realized her husband was a neurotic liability with a fondness for alcohol and toy soldiers. Catherine was smart, ambitious, and had the kind of charm that made generals swoon and courtiers whisper. She saw her chance, and on July 9, 1762, she rallied the army, marched into St. Petersburg, and declared herself Empress of Russia. Peter III abdicated, and depending on which historian you ask, he was either quietly assassinated or just conveniently disappeared. Catherine II was crowned in September 1762, and for the next 34 years she ruled with brilliance, flair, and a dash of ruthlessness. She westernized Russia, expanded its territory into Poland and Crimea, and turned the Russian court into a glittering hub of European culture. She corresponded with Voltaire, read Enlightenment philosophy, and threw lavish parties that made Versailles look like a school cafeteria. But while Catherine promised to end serfdom, she actually strengthened it. The peasants remained shackled to the land, and the nobility grew fat on their labor. This widening gap between ruler and ruled planted the seeds of revolution that would one day uproot the Romanovs entirely. When Catherine died in 1796, her son Paul I took the throne. His father was officially Peter III, but rumors swirled that one of Catherine's lovers might have contributed more than just conversation. Paul was paranoid, erratic, and ruled like a man who thought everyone was out to get him. Which, to be fair, they were. He lasted less than 5 years before being assassinated, likely with the quiet approval of his own court. Paul's son, Alexander I, became Tsar the next day and immediately began undoing his father's mess. He was well-liked, thoughtful, and, like his grandmother Catherine, failed to abolish serfdom. His crowning achievement? Defeating Napoleon in 1812, turning Russia into the most powerful empire in Europe. As a reward, he annexed Poland, becoming its monarch. But Alexander's story ends with a twist worthy of a spy novel. He died suddenly in 1825, and rumors spread that he hadn't died at all, but had faked his death and retreated to Siberia to live as a monk. His courtiers refused to open his coffin, which only fueled the mystery. Was he sipping tea in a snowy cabin while Europe mourned? We'll never know. Alexander I was succeeded by his brother Nicholas, who ruled with an iron fist and a love for military parades. His son, Alexander II, took over in 1855, just as the Crimean War exposed how technologically behind Russia was. Alexander II responded with sweeping reforms. He emancipated the serfs, reduced class privilege, and pushed economic development. But reform came with a price. After surviving an assassination attempt in 1866, Alexander II turned repressive, and in 1881, revolutionaries finally succeeded in killing him with a bomb. His son, Alexander III, saw this as proof that liberal policies were dangerous and doubled down on Russian nationalism and autocracy. Alexander III's son, Nicholas II, took the throne in 1894. He was gentle, introverted, and more interested in family life than ruling an empire. His devotion to his wife Alexandra led him into the orbit of Grigory Rasputin, a mystic and faith healer with a beard that could frighten livestock. Rasputin's influence over the royal family became a national scandal, and Nicholas's refusal to reform alienated the people. Civil unrest boiled over into the Russian Revolution of 1917. Nicholas abdicated, and he and his entire family were executed in Yekaterinburg, ending the Romanov dynasty in blood and silence. Today, the Romanov name lives on in descendants scattered across Europe. Some claim royal lineage, others live quietly, and a few have tried to reclaim their legacy. But the truth is, the Romanovs were a dynasty born from chaos, crowned by compromise, and ultimately undone by their refusal to change with the times. They gave Russia some of its most iconic rulers, and some of its most baffling ones. From teenage monks to Enlightenment empresses, from beard taxes to secret carpentry gigs, the Romanovs were never boring. They were a dynasty of drama, brilliance, and tragedy, and their story is one for the ages. And that brings us to the end of this amazing adventure. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a moment of intrigue, rebellion, and royal drama. More epic tales are just around the corner.